Welcome to Short Course, episode 90 for February 3rd, 2023. I'm your host, Ben Barry. So I took last week off. It was a busy week. As those of you who have seen what I've been up to on Instagram know, I had the opportunity to take a 2-day class with Eric Graffel shortly before the Panamerican Extreme Open match, and it was at a range about 2 hours away. It was in Tampa. And the reason I didn't say anything about it before now was I was actually asked by the class organizer, Buck Lawler from Strapped, which is the name of this training company that they're putting together in Florida. He just said, "Hey, keep it quiet." I assume because if word got out that there was a Graffel class, then people would be blowing up his inbox. Sorry, I'm still getting over something that I caught on the way back from this match. But anyway, I assume, he just wanted to keep it quiet just because there were only 20 slots. There were two classes, two-day classes, 10 people each, and he was doing it invite only, trying to keep it to people who I guess are avid shooters, not just people who are sort of tourists and want to be in the presence of greatness. Which anyway, that was cool. I'll be talking more about that class in later episodes, but I wanted to talk tonight about the Pan American Extreme Open itself, and there's a lot to talk about. So let's get right to it. The match itself, it was a 30-stage match shot in 3 days, 3 half days, 10 stages each half day. And I mean, one thing that was kind of interesting is I definitely think the schedule that I was on, where we had 2 afternoons and 1 morning, was an advantage. Looking at some of the video from the other folks shooting the other schedule, the lighting in the morning was definitely not as favorable. Just, sun really close to the berm, that kind of thing. So I definitely, I looked for a squad on the rotation that only had 1 morning, and I think that worked out. The process of signing up for the match was a little interesting. It was run by the guys out of Czech Republic that run the Extreme Euro Open, and you registered through their system, and then you had to send in a money order, an international money order, which was kind of funny. My bank was like asking me all these questions. How do you know this business? Basically, they were trying to make sure I wasn't getting scammed. And the match fee was $300, and I think the wire fee was $40, something like that. So, it adds to the cost, but at the end of the day, for a match like this, it costs what it costs. It took a little bit of time just waiting for everything to go through and for it to show up in their system. And one thing that I did find interesting, it looks like they have their own bespoke sign-up system that they use for all of these extreme matches. At least it's not something I've seen anywhere else. I don't know if it's a white label of something that somebody else has developed or if they developed it in-house, but it was definitely an interesting contrast to Practice Score. Primarily, one thing that was interesting and would potentially have been useful was people who have a paid slot can mark their slot as being for sale. And so if there's someone in your country that has a slot for sale, then you can just use whatever your local Venmo or Cash App or whatever you have in your country and just do a transaction in your local currency, and you can negotiate the price between the two of you, and then you just buy the slot locally. So obviously in Practice Score, really the only thing you can do is request a refund, which at that point the match director has to approve it, and maybe it's a 50% refund or whatever. But in this system, I don't think they were doing refunds beyond whatever the cutoff date was. But if you could find somebody in your country who was looking to buy a slot, you could potentially get close to face value for the slot, which was, again, it's one of those things that when you look at it, it seems kind of obvious, and then you kind of wish, hey, what if Practice Score were to implement something like that? It's funny. I've been around long enough that I remember the days 2015-ish that before Practice Score, where you just showed up for the match, paid your match fee, signed in, and wrote your name on a clipboard that for the squad you wanted to be a part of. And in some ways, Practice Score still feels kind of new and awesome, but in other ways, you realize it really hasn't changed in the last 10 years. It's basically the features have been pretty much what they've been. They had the whole social media thing that they tried to do for a while that kind of went nowhere. But, adding some of these types of features, I mean, there's definitely room for it. Now, obviously, there's other constraints there and who's going to pay for it and all that. But it was just definitely interesting to see the sign up through a different system that had a different set of features. But on the whole, I liked it. The match itself took place at the Volusia County Hunt and Gun Club, or the Volusia County range. Basically, I think it's about 45 minutes north of Orlando. And it was an interesting enough facility. It's definitely the opposite of kind of a frost-proof Talladega, kind of all of the bays just in a line type range. All the different bays were kind of oddly shaped and put in different corners and nooks, and as you walked around, hey, here's an opening between a couple of berms, and here's a giant bay, and then you'd walk around another berm, and there'd be a little, maybe 10-yard by 10-yard bay. So there was definitely a wide variety in the sizes of bays, but on the whole, I don't think it wasn't an inappropriate range. I mean, one thing that I did kind of wonder about is there were a few big bays, like 30 yards square, something like that were not being used. One was being used by some class that was going on during the match, and then I guess maybe they left the other two of these big bays open for members to come shoot. I'm not really sure, but it definitely is a facility that could have run that did run 30 stages and could have run more, or even just had 30 stages, but some of them in bigger bays. So when we talk about potential facilities for major matches, I mean, this was my first time at this one, and again, they had a really interesting diversity of some big bays, some small ones, and obviously it worked. I think it worked to the 3-2-1 format of IPSC, because there were a lot of smaller bays where they could put some of the 12 round short courses. Now, that said, some of the bays were definitely on the cramped side, and like I said, I wish they would have used some of the bigger ones. There were a few where they split a big bay into two 12-round short courses, and I think those were some of the better of the short courses. They had some of the longer shots. They had a little bit more of the movement. They had a little bit more dynamic movement. It wasn't just all left to right or front to back, but there was a dog leg kind of shape to the shooting area, or at least the path you took through it. But on the whole, it definitely, the facility I think was adequate, and definitely if they could take over more of the bigger bays could be more than adequate. The setup of the match was, like I said, 30 stages, 10 stages a day in a half-day format, and the squads were a max of 8 people per squad. The squad that I was on ended up being only 5 people, which I definitely would have rather them gone in and maybe broken our squad up and merged us with 2 other 5-person squads or something to get us to 7 or 8. We did have, on the first day, due to some shenanigans, Jared Fox did end up shooting with our squad, and that brought us up to 6, and Jared was also extremely helpful in pasting and resetting and taking videos and just generally helping the squad move. And definitely day 2 and 3, it was more, we went from 6 down to 5. I mean, it was a big drop. And so the second 2 days were definitely more of a grind. On the third day, we did eventually figure out that we just need to, everybody shoots and resets, and then at the end, everybody just stops, load your mags at the end, take a breather. If you need to take a bite of, some snack or something, just hang out at the bay before you leave, because once you get to the new bay, then the RO wants to brief you, wants to start, wants to get everything rolling. And so your opportunity to kind of catch your breath, load your mags. We had 3 open shooters on our squad, so they were cleaning mags on the stages where they had to drop one, and so there was definitely that worked out. It helped once we figured that out on the third day. And to be honest, the whole shooting 10 stages in a half day format thing worked. I mean, it worked better than I expected. The stage breakdown, so like I said, there are 30 stages. It broke down, by my count, it broke down perfectly into 15 shorts, 10 mediums, 5 longs, and on every stage, short, medium, or long, we had a 3-minute walkthrough, which honestly, the way that the stages were constructed was plenty. Even the long courses, for the most part, even with being 30, 32 rounds, they because you only had 5 people in the shooting area with you, you could get a pretty good look at everything you needed to see. And that the stage design wasn't typical kind of USPSA gimmicky mind game type stuff. Everything was it was pretty obvious where the best place to shoot each target was from, where each target from was. There was one 32 rounder that was a sort of horseshoe shape, and from both tips of the horseshoe there were a bunch of targets that you could see, and so there was a slight memory aspect to that one. And so you just had to remember which targets you'd shot from the start. You could start anywhere in the shooting area, so basically everybody started at one of the tips of the horseshoe, and you just had to remember when you got to the second tip what you had shot from the first one. But other than that, I mean, honestly, the 3-minute walkthrough, because the stage design was conducive to it, the 3-minute walkthrough was not an issue. Now, I know I've gone on record in the past saying that going shorter than 5 minutes at most USPSA matches, I think is shortchanging your shooters for really kind of false economy. But when you're talking about 10 stages per half day, so 20 stages a day in your whole schedule, those 2 minutes do add up. And honestly, especially on the 12 rounders, there really wasn't that much to see. You kind of, okay, I'm going to start here. Maybe I go to some second position. Here's what I can see from there, and then I'm going to go to a third position. Most of the 12 rounders really broke down into 3 positions, and it was interesting, right? Because you could see some targets entering and leaving. It wasn't just shoot, hard run, hard setup, shoot, hard run, hard setup. There was definitely opportunities to shoot your way in and out, to sort of ease in, to maybe skip a steel target to take an easier paper target, and then once you were settled in the position, transition back to the steel target. There were definitely those opportunities. But to someone who knew what they were looking at and this wasn't their first big match, it was pretty easy to break those down pretty quickly. And so the 3-minute walkthrough thing, I think worked just fine. And even if it didn't, to some degree, it was at least fair, right? Everybody got the same amount of time. And so, sometimes you were first on a big stage and you got a little bit shafted by that, but I remember on that horseshoe stage that I was looking at, I think I was second. And so when I was walking it through, from the very beginning, I was looking for a sort of safe, memorable plan. I wasn't looking for anything crazy or complicated. I was just looking to get something that I could easily burn in and get used to and perform in 5 minutes, because that's basically was going to take, the shooter ahead of me. And then it was my turn to perform. So I think there definitely is an aspect to that where when the stages are built to provide for it, the shorter walkthroughs definitely work. And like I mentioned in my retrospective at the NC section last year, I definitely think, for example, I did a very poor job of that with the stage that I contributed. It ended up being really quite a bit of a memory stage, and you really wanted 10, 15, 20 minutes to walk it because you could see the targets from so many different places, and that's just the kind of stage that you just didn't see at a match like this. And honestly, I like that. To me, this whole thing of, we want options, people wanting to solve the stage like it's a crossword puzzle and there are 4 or 5 different possible paths through the stage, and what's the most optimal, like that just isn't that interesting to me. To me, it's make the shots interesting, make the entries and exits, give me some options in that way, but making it so that, the stage is a big box and I can either go 1, 2, 3, 4 or 1, 4, 3, 2 or 1, 3, 2, 4. I mean, it's just, I'm going to the same places. I'm basically just deciding which order to go to the places in. That kind of option isn't really that interesting to me. And there wasn't a lot of that kind of option in this match, and that was okay with me. There were, by my count, 22 of the 30 stages that had a single swinger in them. None of the stages had more than that, and a single swinger was the only type of mover available. All but one of those swingers was activated by a plate that fell on a rope, which is that's the way you always see it in the Extreme Euro matches, and it's very simple. And I actually really I thought it was very effective. Definitely something to look into if you're starting up a club or whatever, and you're looking for a way and you don't want to deal with the steel cables and tying down the nuts and having eye bolts into your poppers and all that crap. It worked. It was simple. The reset was easy, and I like that. The flavor was definitely very repetitive in the sense that every swinger had basically the same presentation. You had some of it over the top, and then you had varying degrees of partial A zone at the dwell. Some of them you had the whole A zone and maybe a partial Charlie. Some of them you had 20 or 25% of the A zone at the dwell. And so those you were better taking over the top, which honestly I thought was kind of interesting. I mean, all the swingers were the same, but each one was also subtly different. And the question of which ones do you take over the top versus maybe you take one shot over the top and one shot at the dwell, or some of them were you had they were slow enough and the presentation was good enough that you could just take two shots at the dwell. So even though they were very fine gradations, I thought that it was interesting. You really had to look at every swinger. It wasn't just, oh well, okay, it's an over the top IPSC swinger. I'm just gonna have to just take it on the move at over the top. It was, again, it's weird. I feel like this is a sort of left-handed compliment, but I liked the style. It was very uniform. There was no hardcover anywhere. The only partials, there weren't even like barrel hardcover partials. The only partials were no shoots, which obviously are very punishing. And there were a few different styles of presentations, but most of them were just a no shoot at the 6 o'clock position low with a various amount of A zone above it visible. And there was no prone. There were no even low ports or mid ports. There was no one-handed shooting, which honestly I feel like that was kind of a miss. I'm not really sure why, but there were definitely a few of the smaller stages that I think could have been made more interesting as stages. They were just kind of bland on their own and kind of blended all together. But if you said, okay, this one you have to shoot all strong hand on this little 12-round short course, it definitely would have tested something different. And so all 30 stages were a very similar style, but to be totally honest, it was a style that I like shooting. It was one of these where the targets were spaced around where you couldn't just set up in one spot. For the most part, there were a few bigger stages where you could set up in hose, but especially on the 12 rounders, you were from any one position you could see maybe two targets. Occasionally you could see three, but it was a lot of find your spot, set up just enough to get the shot, and then push out, go to the next spot. If you push too hard, you're going to overrun the fault lines and have to come back, or you're going to be coming in too hot on some of the smaller pieces of steel. I would say roughly half the pieces of steel, something like that. Maybe more than half were 8-inch square plates, and the bases that they had that held the square plates seemed pretty durable. I didn't personally see anybody on our squad hit the base and have the plate fall. I'm sure it probably happened somewhere during the match, but definitely compared to your typical plate holder base that is pretty easy to shoot, get it to fall off, and then you're looking at a reshoot. There didn't seem to be a ton of issues with that, and honestly, I like plates, especially to all the poppers in this match were the 2-piece poppers, which because there's no hinge, I find you can hit them pretty darn low below the calibration zone and they'll still fall, and so they're effectively a much easier target if you know that, and that you can basically your center of aim should be the 6 o'clock on the calibration zone, because even if you're 3 or 4 inches low on that, it's still going to go down. And so to me, having these 8-inch plates, it really made you focus. It made you really want to get that hit, and I appreciate that. I appreciated that challenge. And almost every one of the 12-round short courses had at least 2 pieces of steel. Some had 4, and I mean, it sounds trite, but you can do a pretty interesting stage with 4 pieces of paper and 4 pieces of steel. It's 8 targets. You break that up into 3 positions. Maybe some of the targets are visible from 2 different spots, or one of the targets visible coming in or out. I mean, I really did enjoy the stages, and even though they all kind of blended together and had a very similar flavor, I have the shooting here I really enjoyed. And while, yeah, it definitely could have been more difficult, they could have used mini targets, they could have used some one-handed shooting, they could have used different kinds of movers, they could have used hardcover. They didn't, and I think it was okay, especially as a first time around. I would hope that they introduce more of that kind of variety and different challenge next year, but for what it was for this first year, I was pretty happy with the shooting. That said, there definitely were some issues that could have been done quite a bit better in terms of just the staffing of the match. I I'm sure this is not a surprise to the organizers, but they had maybe half the staff they probably should have. I would say most of the short courses were being run by a single RO to time and score, and I think all the mediums and longs had two ROs, one to time and one to score. But competitors were doing 100% of the reset. Sometimes the ROs would help reset the swinger just to make sure it was consistent, but in terms of the pasting, it was all the competitors, and the resetting steel was. And I don't know how other squads did it. At first I was, trying to be the guy painting the steel between every shooter, and then eventually I realized nobody else cared. And like I said a minute ago, it's pretty darn unlikely that you're going to get a calibration hit on one of these, or a calibration call on one of these two-piece poppers, just because even an edge hit will often spin them and they'll fall, or a low hit, they'll still fall. So honestly, when I kind of realized that nobody else cared, I stopped painting, and I guess most ROs were just painting between squads, which, in that way, with the competitors self-resetting and the, painting between squads, in that way, it had more of a club match flavor. And like I said earlier, I definitely think having a 5-person squad was probably a more detrimental experience than even being on, say, an 8-person squad, right? Which is almost twice as many people to kind of share the load and be able to help reset and have some kind of rotation where you get something of a break. So that part of it was definitely a frustration for me. My understanding is that this match was originally scheduled, I believe, out at St. George in 2020, and then COVID hit and it got delayed, and I think it got delayed 2 or 3 times, and then they finally announced this date, and obviously it actually happened on this date. But after they had announced that they were on this date, then the Florida State USPSA match announced that they were taking the same weekend 2 hours away in Tampa. And my impression is a lot of the local USPSA RO volunteer folks went there and were working that match, which I can't begrudge them. That's their state match. If you told me that my state match was, one weekend, and then the same weekend 2 hours away in the state there was, some big level 3 match, I'd probably end up being loyal to my level 2 match as well, which, yeah, I mean, it sucked. I don't think anybody was really happy about it. I'm told, I didn't go looking, but I'm told they were posting on Facebook basically asking for volunteers and paying hundreds of dollars for people just to come out and basically just help run the match for the second 2 days, I think it was. So it was definitely something that I don't think anybody had any illusions that it was going on. But to a certain degree, once the match is rolling, you have to do it with the people you have. And luckily they did have, for the most part, I think probably 25 of the 30 stages had at least one IROA certified person on the stage, which is nice. There were a few stages that were being short courses mostly that were being run by someone who seemed to only have USPSA training, which that seems like one of those things that if it happens 2 years in a row, then I'll really be worried. But hopefully this is just sort of a growing pain. It was the ball was dropped somewhere, and they just, hopefully it's resolved. That to me, that was definitely the biggest drawback, the biggest sort of disappointment of the match. And as you can imagine, the short staff, there was basically nobody really around to do a thorough equipment check, or they didn't even bother trying to run chrono. And yeah, when you checked in with your gun, you wrote your serial number on the page, but there were definitely some questionably legal production guns being shot. And I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not that worried about it. I mean, again, this was the first match. There were no cash prizes on offer, and the guys, in all the cases that I was aware of, it was guys borrowing guns or something that wasn't quite up to snuff, and they were just there to shoot. I don't think anybody that was in the top 10 probably in their division was pulling any shenanigans. And so I still think it was an interesting match for the guys that really wanted to be there. Obviously, it's a different crowd that is going to go to an IPSC match than the Florida State match that's in the state the same weekend. But yeah, it definitely was. It was not. There was no rigor in that sense. It was very much on the honor system, which again for a first time match, I'll give it a pass. If it happens again next year, that'll be a different issue. And we'll get to this later, but they've announced that the IPSC nationals are going to be at this range in later this year. And again, if it's the same thing there, if they're not running chrono and equipment check for an IPSC nationals, which potentially is a qualifier for the world shoot, then yeah, they need to get that stuff figured out. But hopefully by being able to actually not have a scheduling conflict with another big match in the state with more people, they'll be able to do that stuff. I don't think it's one of those where they didn't do it because they just don't care. I think they didn't do it because they didn't have the people, and that's just the way it was. As I mentioned on I think a previous episode, the schedule for the shooting was the main match was Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So you shot a half day each of those three. And then Sunday was supposed to be Super Six, which is this format where it's 6 people shoot a stage from the match, and then the top 4 go and shoot a second stage, and then the top 2 from those shoot a third stage, and it's a sort of this man-on-man shoot-off, but it's in a stage kind of format. And that didn't end up happening. What they did on Sunday was just the top however many people showed up in each division. So I guess they went. I should say I wasn't there. I ended up skipping out on it just because honestly I was, after having done the whole match and the whole self-resetting thing, I really wasn't all that enthused about whatever they were going to slap together on Sunday. And the way my flight schedule worked out, basically I could take an earlier flight and get home at noon and get to see my wife and kid, or I could take the later flight and get home at midnight and have to be at work 9 hours later and not get to see my family. And so at the end of the day, after having been on the road for 8 days and kind of, 3 long days of shooting and not even being sure that there was going to be anything happening on Sunday at all, I ended up taking the earlier flight. So what I know about the shoot-off stuff is secondhand and from what I saw online, but it looks like maybe 30, 40 people showed up, and in each division, they just took, I don't know if they did a bracket of 4 or a bracket of 8, but they took the top 4 or the top 8, just going down the list of whoever was there, the top 4 or the top 8 in each division. And they just did a very traditional style man-on-man shoot-off, draw like 6 poppers, knock them down, reload, and then shoot a final popper. And whoever's final popper goes down first is the winner. And it's the sort of, man-on-man, single, double elimination, whatever it is. And then they did awards, which it looks like they did, medals, first place, second place, third place, which is a very sort of European thing. And they had a little podium, which was cool. But yeah, at the end of the day, it was one of those where I definitely, by the end of the match, my patience was a little tested, and I was just ready to be home. I'd been gone for a while, and so I didn't really feel like sticking around. But I do, I think in the future, if I do go down and shoot a match at this range, it's only a little over an 8-hour drive, so I think I'll probably just end up driving, which obviously gives you more flexibility on, okay, if Sunday is a bust, then you just hit the road early, versus there's a rigidity that I don't know that I really mentally understood about flying even a sort of short distance flight like this. And, that rigidity limits your options. And so I made the choice I did, and I'm decently happy with it. I got to shoot the 30 stages, which really is what I wanted to. And I got to kind of vicariously see what they did on Sunday, which again was not, I think, what anybody wanted. I genuinely believe they want to do a proper Super Six, but just the way things were, people, a lot of the top guys, a lot of the top 6 in some of the divisions took off. And so they weren't there to do the Super Six. And so they did the next best thing, which, okay, I respect that for the people that were there. They tried to put on a good show, but yeah, I don't feel like I missed a whole ton by cutting out early, but I hope they do better next year. I hope it's worth staying next year. So I did, to kind of wrap up with some summary thoughts, I did put out on Instagram, I did a little question sticker story thingy, just asking people questions, what they were curious to know about the match. And one person asked, how does it compare to other IPSC matches? And I will say, that's a tough question. Compared to the US IPSC Nationals, in the style that were run at Frostproof, which, as far as I can tell, they haven't done one since 2019. I'm guessing because COVID 2020, 21, and then 22, we didn't need it as a qualifier for the World Shoot, and I guess there just wasn't that much interest. And obviously, Shannon Smith isn't at Universal Shooting Academy anymore, and he was always kind of the mastermind behind that. So, but looking at the way that Shannon would run the Frostproof IPSC Nationals, I definitely think the strong suit, the most interesting stages at this match were some of the short courses. A lot of the mediums I think were pretty interesting. Honestly, most of the longs were kind of boring. They had a lot of double stacks. A lot of them were just kind of hosey. A lot of them you could have just taken out a bunch of the targets, and honestly the stage would have been better. You could have, if they had made all of the long courses 26 rounds just to barely comply with the definition, but make the shooting more interesting, that would have been okay with me. But no, I mean the short courses compared to a lot of the stuff that you see at a US IPSC Nationals. I mean, reviewing my own video from the few years that I shot it, the short courses are definitely more kind of speed shooty. Stand in a box, or you have 8 poppers, and then one of the poppers on each side activates a swinger, so a little more carnival-y. Whereas, I mean, some of the short courses were 11 rounds, 5 pieces of paper and 1 piece of steel, but you kind of got to pick where you started. You got to navigate the stage, usually go to 3 positions. Honestly, and now that I think about it, one of the things that was kind of strange about the match was most of the stages, I would say probably 80%, just off the top of my head, were start standing anywhere in the shooting area, which again, kind of like throwing in some one-handed shooting or some hardcover. I feel like specifying a start position, a really interestingly chosen start position, is a almost free of charge way to add texture and interesting options to a stage. Whereas, honestly, again, on almost every one of those stages where you could start standing anywhere in the shooting area, you were basically just drawing straight to a target. So there were very few stages where you had to draw and step. And there were a couple of those, the ones where you had to start heels on marks or something like that. But again, the vast majority of them, I think they could have specified a start position and just added that little bit, added a few steps of movement, added a little bit of texture to the stage, would have brought the hit factors down a little bit. But, it's just one of those free things that, again, I'm kind of puzzled. The stages were generally good, but then they just didn't do stuff like that. I don't know. Anyway, so I will say, aside from the constrained bays, so there was very little far shooting. Almost everything was like 10 yards and in. There were some 15, maybe a few 20-yard shots, maybe. But it was relatively close range. Like I said, no hard cover, so it was either a no-shoot partial or wide open. And so in that sense, it was definitely, I think, more like a European IPSC match in the stage design than even something like a US IPSC Nationals. And yeah, honestly, in terms of the actual stages, the actual shooting, it is definitely one of the most enjoyable, satisfying matches that I've shot in a long time. And so I really, my only complaint is they could have done, some of these more further things to add a little more texture to the stages that wouldn't really cost them anything. And so it's a little puzzling that they didn't. But again, for being the first time out, I'm perfectly happy with that. But again, I would definitely like to see them use some of the bigger bays, have some of the long courses be more like an IPSC long course where you're running more linear distance, but also have longer shots. But yeah, as a first attempt, I think it was definitely solid. The other question that I got that I haven't really covered in the flow of the rest of the episode here was, what kind of physical and mental preparation would you do for a match like this? And honestly, from a physical standpoint, especially, I mean, the weather was, it was January in Florida. There was one day that was a little warm and the sun was strong, and I put on some sunscreen. The morning that we shot, it was pretty chilly. I think it was like 50. I definitely had a long sleeve pullover on for most of the match, but honestly, compared to shooting a typical 6, 7, 8 stage US PSA club match, physically it was no harder than any of that. And part of that was the stages were all pretty close, so you weren't really walking very far down range, and the pasting was, it was pretty was pretty easy. But yeah, physically it was not a particularly demanding match given the weather and again the fact that the stages are pretty small. But I definitely think mentally, obviously having 30 stages, that's a lot of opportunities to mess up, and you just got to remind yourself, hey, everybody else is out there messing up, and this is just one stage out of 30. You can get back on track and put up good scores on the rest of them. I definitely, for me personally, in terms of performance and mentally, that the third day was definitely my strongest. It was the cleanest I shot, the fewest. I had no penalties and no. I don't even think I had deltas, but it was definitely the best points that I shot the whole match, and so that felt good. And then sort of the typical IPSC thing that when you don't get a chance to look at the stages ahead of time, and you only get 3 minutes to look at it, you sort of have to recalibrate the level of perfection that you're expecting in your stage plan. There really is this mindset in the US where you can show up and potentially walk a complex stage for 20 minutes before the match starts, whether it's a big match or a local match. And that just doesn't exist in this sport. And I think that's cool. And you kind of have to, shift your mental perspective when you're coming up with a stage plan from you're going to be able to visualize every single target perfectly 100 times through. I mean, first of all, even with an 8-man squad, you're not going to have that much time. And B, you're just not going to have that much time in the shooting area to really get a perfect sequence of all the targets. But you really, you learn through in your 3 minutes to walk through, really key in on the important details, to sort of take the mental snapshots of the really important target presentations and then visualize through those in your head. I mean, honestly, I think this match, as someone who hasn't shot this style of short walk through lots of short stages all in a row, this one really was not terribly punishing. And so I think for someone who is used to shooting bigger USPSA stages, it's a little bit of a shift, like I said, in the level of perfection that you expect in yourself. But in terms of sort of mental capacity, if you can visualize some of these gonzo 28, 30, 32 round stages that you see in the US, again, you're only going to see 1 out of 6 stages are even going to be longer than 24 rounds in IPSC. And in a lot of cases, what I found really the 12 rounders, the short courses, you really had more room to focus in on the really fine details, and just don't take those for granted. That's for sure. You want to the 12 round short courses. I mean, they're half the stages in the match, but when you correct for match points, they end up being roughly about a third of the overall match points. And so that's you throw a few of those away and you're really putting yourself in a bad place points wise. Other than that, it's the shooting's still shooting. I think the level of precision that IPSC targets and the target presentations, especially with minor scoring, I find really, really satisfying. Like I said, I really enjoyed the shooting at this match, and I really hope they can get some of these issues squared away. One thing that was asked that I realized I didn't cover, so the stated posted number of rounds to bring was 550, and the actual match ended up being 532 minimum. So with makeups, probably 575, something like that. So definitely pretty much right on the money that they predicted. And I think certainly if you were looking at a format for U.S. Nationals, you could do a lot worse than this. You could having the mix of the shorter stages, but letting you run more squads and cycling them through the stages more quickly. I mean, it's like going from so if you look at Talladega, where they can run 15 squads at a time, it's like a computer with 15 CPUs. Whereas at this match, they could be running 30 squads simultaneously because there were 30 stages. Now, some of they doubled up bays, so it's not a perfect comparison, but they double up bays at Talladega as well. But in terms of keeping people moving through the stages, having smaller squads, and spending less downtime between shooting, I think this format works really well. And just in terms of getting sort of more bites at the apple, more samples per shooter, more chances for a shooter to either succeed or fail. hey, if you told me that we were going to a 3-2-1 format and every nationals from here on out was going to be 30 stages instead of 18 or 22 or whatever the most recent ones have been, I'd be okay with that. In fact, I think that would be a good thing. So just to wrap up here, they did announce during the match, they announced that the IPSC Nationals, the U.S. Nationals, will be at Volusia November 16th through 19th. So the 16th will be staff day. Friday the 17th, we'll shoot all 18 stages in a single day. So basically morning and afternoon, I guess. And then Saturday, Sunday will be a half-day format. So you'll shoot 9 stages each day. And I assume they'll probably do awards on the range Sunday night. That would just be my guess. It didn't say on the little flyer that they had around the range. But yeah, it'll be an 18-stage match. So kind of similar to this, except 9 stages a day instead of 10. But pretty similar. And hopefully, again, they can use some of the bigger bays and have more staff. But that's just pure supposition. And then they also said that the 2024 Pan American Extreme Open, the main match will be February 1st through 3rd, 2024. Match fee is going up to $330, so 10% increase plus whatever your wire transfer fee is. But I'm assuming from the fact that it's a 3-day main match, it'll be similar. It'll be 3 days of 10 stages each, which again, this range is well suited to. They have a lot of small bays where they can put up some of these short courses, and then they've got the bigger ones where hopefully they can stretch things out next year. But I have to, I have to figure out. I just found out that this IPSC Nationals, as I mentioned, I think the last episode I did, I was kind of curious. Hey, when's it going to be? Where's it going to be? If, PTO and everything were no object, I definitely would like to shoot this match. We'll see if it works out with everything else going on this year. But yeah, that's where the IPSC Nationals will be. And I believe I have heard secondhand that the World Shoot selection policy for the 2025 World Shoot will once again be the best 4 out of the US and IPSC Nationals from the 2 previous years. So if this year, which again, this should all be announced relatively soon after this podcast posts, but if this year is a World Shoot qualifier year for the 2025 World Shoot, then I expect it should be a pretty interesting match, because everybody that wants to go to the World Shoot will probably need to be there. And as somebody who sort of talks all the time about how cool it would be to have one big nationals a year where everybody just comes and throws down, it looks like the US IPSC Nationals will probably be the closest thing we get to that. And so, yeah, like I said, I got to figure it out. I'd love to go, but we'll see if it happens. And obviously everything with the election this year, and yeah, we'll see. But I would like to go. Again, hopefully they can fix some of the logistical staffing issues at this range, which was really the main disappointment. And the matches, these IPSC matches from here on out will be as good as they've ever been. So that wraps up this episode of Short Course. My email is ben@berryshooting.com. If you have any questions or you want more information about anything, let me know. If I get a bunch of interest, I'll do a follow-up episode and talk some more about this. I tried to talk through everything I can think of, and we're at about 45 minutes, so it's definitely one of the longer episodes. But yeah, if there's something you want to know, just shoot me an email. Talk to you next time.